Sir, this is completely unacceptable. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez's voice cut through the morning stillness of Courtroom 3B, like a prosecutor's closing argument, sharp and unforgiving. Contempt of court, failure to appear, and now this blatant display of stolen valor. She gestured dramatically toward the defendant's table, where 83-year-old William Thompson stood with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered far worse storms than a county courthouse could produce. His weathered hands remained clasped behind his back, his faded blue eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the judge's bench. The small pin on his worn flannel shirt caught the fluorescent light, a simple bronze star suspended from a faded ribbon that had seen decades of careful handling. To most observers, it looked like nothing more than an old military decoration, the kind that might be found in any veteran's memorabilia collection. To Martinez, it represented an opportunity to make headlines and advance her political career by prosecuting what appeared to be a clear-cut case of federal fraud. Your Honor, Martinez continued, her voice rising with theatrical indignation, we have before us a man who not only shows flagrant disregard for this court's authority, but who also dishonors every legitimate veteran by wearing military decorations he has no legal right to possess. Judge Harold Brennan, a 58-year-old career jurist with political ambitions of his own, leaned forward from his elevated bench. The morning's docket was crowded with routine cases, and he saw this as an opportunity to dispose of what appeared to be a simple matter quickly and decisively. The initial charge had been minor, a parking violation that had escalated when William failed to appear for his original court date due to a medical appointment at the VA hospital. But when he finally arrived in court wearing the bronze star, Martinez had spotted what she believed was an easy prosecution under the Stolen Valor Act. Thompson, Judge Brennan said, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult defendants. You stand accused of violating federal law by wearing military decorations without authorization. Do you have documentation proving your right to wear that medal? William's response was barely audible, spoken with the measured cadence of someone who chose his words carefully. It was given to me, Your Honor. Martinez let out a short laugh that echoed in the nearly empty courtroom. Given to Your Honor. This is exactly the kind of vague, evasive answer we expect from individuals attempting to defraud the system. She walked closer to the defendant's table, her high heels clicking against the linoleum floor with aggressive precision. Our preliminary investigation shows no record of William Thompson in military service databases. No DD-214, no service record, no legitimate claim to wear any military decoration. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Deputy Collins, shifted his weight and moved slightly closer to William, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from routine legal proceeding to something approaching a public humiliation. Thompson, Martinez pressed, can you produce any documentation whatsoever proving your military service? William shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving that distant point beyond the judge. No documentation, Martinez repeated for the court reporter, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Your Honor, this is a textbook case of stolen valor. We have an elderly defendant wearing military decorations he cannot prove he earned, seeking to gain the respect and benefits reserved for our nation's true heroes. She turned to address the small gallery of observers, court staff, a few attorneys waiting for later cases, and a young woman in the back row who had been taking notes throughout the proceeding. The Bronze Star is one of our military's highest decorations for valor in combat. Martinez continued, warming to her theme. It represents courage under fire, sacrifice in service to our nation. For someone to wear it fraudulently is not just a federal crime, it's an insult to every man and woman who has served with honor. Judge Brennan nodded approvingly. This was the kind of case that played well in election years, demonstrating firm support for veterans while taking a hard line against fraud. Mr. Thompson, you've been given multiple opportunities to provide evidence supporting your right to wear that decoration. Your continued refusal to do so leaves this court no choice but to. Your Honor, William interrupted quietly, his voice carrying just enough authority to pause the judge's pronouncement. The medal isn't mine. The statement hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Martinez blinked, momentarily thrown off her prepared script. Excuse me, the Bronze Star, William said, his weathered fingers touching the small pin on his shirt with reverence. It belonged to someone else, someone who couldn't bring it home himself. Martinez recovered quickly, sensing an even better angle for her prosecution. So you admit to unlawfully possessing stolen military property? Your Honor, This makes the case even stronger. We're dealing with not just fraud but theft of military decoration. But something in William's tone had caught the attention of the young woman in the back row. Jessica Chen was a first-year law student observing court proceedings as part of her studies. But her grandfather had been a Korean War veteran, and she recognized something in the old man's bearing that didn't match the prosecutor's narrative. The way William held himself, the careful respect with which he touched the metal, the quiet dignity in his voice. These weren't the characteristics of a fraud or a thief. They were the traits her grandfather had possessed, the quiet strength of someone who had seen combat and survived to carry its memories. Jessica pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number her grandfather had given her years earlier. Emergency use only, he had said. If you ever see a veteran being wronged and no one else will listen. As Martinez continued her prosecution, building toward what she clearly believed would be a career-making conviction, Jessica slipped quietly from the courtroom into the hallway. Her heart was pounding as she pressed the call button, hoping she was making the right decision. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Colonel Morrison's office. Sir, my name is Jessica Chen. My grandfather was Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, Korean War veteran. He gave me this number for emergencies involving veteran affairs. What kind of emergency, Miss Chen? Colonel Morrison's voice carried the efficiency of a career military officer accustomed to handling urgent situations. Jessica took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts as she had been taught in law school. Sir, I'm at the county courthouse observing a stolen Valor prosecution. There's an elderly man named William Thompson being accused of illegally wearing a bronze star. Miss Chen, while I appreciate your concern for veteran affairs, stolen Valor cases are handled through proper legal channels. Sir, Jessica interrupted, her voice urgent. Something's not right about this case. The defendant says the medal belonged to someone else, someone who couldn't bring it home. And the way he carries himself, I've seen that bearing before, in my grandfather and his veteran friends. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What did you say the defendant's name was? William Thompson. They're calling him Bear Thompson in the court records. The silence that followed was so profound that Jessica thought the call had been dropped. When Colonel Morrison finally spoke, his voice had completely changed, stripped of its professional detachment and filled with something approaching shock. Miss Chen, you said Bear Thompson? Yes, sir. William Thompson. Goes by Bear. 83 years old, wearing a bronze star that he says belonged to someone else. Jesus Christ, Morrison whispered, and Jessica could hear the sound of papers being shuffled frantically. Miss Chen, listen to me very carefully. Do not let them take that man into custody. Do not let them remove him from that courtroom. We are mobilizing an immediate response. Sir, I'm just a law student. I don't have any authority to. You have more authority than you realize. Morrison cut her off. Bear Thompson is a legend. If that prosecutor tries to arrest him for stolen valor, it will be the biggest mistake of her career. We're en route. The line went dead, leaving Jessica standing in the courthouse hallway with her phone clutched in her trembling hand. Through the courtroom doors, she could hear Martinez building toward her grand finale, clearly preparing to request immediate arrest and federal charges. Jessica rushed back into the courtroom, sliding into her seat just as Martinez was making her final argument to Judge Brennan. The prosecutor was in full theatrical mode, painting William as a pathetic fraud who had dishonored genuine war heroes for personal gain. Your Honor, I request that Mr. Thompson be immediately remanded into federal custody pending a full investigation by the FBI's Stolen Valor Task Force. This court cannot allow such blatant disrespect for our military's highest honors to go unpunished. Judge Brennan was nodding along, clearly impressed by Martinez's presentation and eager to demonstrate his own support for veterans by taking a hard line against fraud. Miss Thompson, the judge said, reaching for his gavel, you have shown complete disrespect for this court and for the memory of our fallen heroes. I find you in contempt and order your immediate. The courthouse fire alarm began blaring, its piercing wail cutting through the judge's pronouncement like a blade. What the hell? Judge Brennan muttered, his gavel frozen halfway to its strike. The fire alarm continued its ear-splitting wail, but something about the pattern seemed off, too controlled, too rhythmic to be an actual emergency signal. Deputy Collins moved toward the courtroom doors, his hand on his radio to check with courthouse security. But before he could make contact, the double doors burst open with enough force to bang against the walls. What entered wasn't the fire department. 6 Marines in dress blue uniforms marched into the courtroom with parade ground precision, their movements synchronized like a ceremonial honor guard. Behind them came two more figures that made Judge Brennan's mouth fall open in shock. Colonel James Morrison entered first, his uniform bearing enough ribbons and decorations to suggest a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. But it was the man beside him who transformed the atmosphere in the courtroom from routine legal proceeding to something approaching a state occasion. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes was one of the most decorated officers in the Marine Corps, a woman whose combat leadership in Iraq and Afghanistan had become the stuff of military legend. Her presence in a county courthouse was so unprecedented that even Martinez stopped mid-sentence, her prepared closing argument forgot. "Your Honor," General Hayes said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made colonels snap to attention. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we received word that this court was about to make a serious error." Judge Brennan struggled to find his voice. "General, I'm not sure what you mean. This is a simple stolen valor case involving—" "There is nothing simple about Bear Thompson," General Hayes interrupted, her eyes moving to William with unmistakable respect. "And if you proceed with this prosecution, you will be arresting one of the most decorated Marines in Corps history." Martinez, sensing her case slipping away, stepped forward aggressively. "General, with all due respect, our investigation shows no record of this man's military service. He admits the medal isn't even his. This is exactly the kind of fraud the Stolen Valor Act was designed to prevent." General Hayes turned her attention to the prosecutor, and Martinez actually took a step backward under the intensity of that gaze. "Martinez, your investigation was apparently not very thorough. Bear Thompson's service record is classified at levels your office lacks the clearance to access." She gestured toward William, who had remained standing at attention throughout the confrontation. "This man served 3 tours in Vietnam as a force reconnaissance Marine. He conducted operations behind enemy lines that officially never happened in places the Marine Corps has never acknowledged sending personnel." Colonel Morrison stepped forward, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Your Honor, we have brought Mr. Thompson's service record, appropriately redacted for public viewing. What you will see is a career that exemplifies everything the Marine Corps stands for." Judge Brennan looked at the folder as if it might explode. His political instincts were screaming warnings about the career implications of whatever was happening in his courtroom. "General," he said carefully, "if Mr. Thompson is indeed a veteran, why doesn't he carry documentation? Why does he claim the medal belongs to someone else?" General Hayes moved to stand directly beside William, her bearing showing the kind of respect typically reserved for Medal of Honor recipients. "Your Honor, Bear Thompson doesn't carry his DD-213 because his discharge papers are classified at compartmentalized special access program level. The missions he conducted were so sensitive that acknowledging them could still compromise national security today." She turned to address the small crowd that had gathered in the courtroom, including court staff who had abandoned their posts to witness what was clearly an extraordinary event. "As for the Bronze Star," General Hayes continued, her voice taking on a reverent tone, "it belonged to Lance Corporal Michael Santos, a 19-year-old Marine who died in Bear Thompson's arms during a classified operation in the Mekong Delta." William's weathered hands trembled slightly as he touched the medal, his eyes showing the weight of memories that had haunted him for over 50 years. "Santos was wounded while providing covering fire for civilian refugees," General Hayes explained. "As he was dying, he pressed his Bronze Star into Sergeant Thompson's hand and made him promise to carry it home, to remember what they had been fighting for." Martinez felt her case and her political ambitions crumbling around her. "General, even if Miss Thompson is a veteran, wearing someone else's medal is still technically—" "Miss Martinez," Colonel Morrison interrupted, opening the classified folder, "perhaps you should see the rest of Bear Thompson's record before you continue making accusations." He pulled out a series of documents, each bearing official military seals and classification markings: Silver Star with Combat Victory, Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters, Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. And this, he held up a final document: Presidential Unit Citation for operations that saved over 200 civilian lives. The courtroom had fallen completely silent except for the quiet sobbing of Jessica Chen, who finally understood why her grandfather had given her that emergency number. General Hayes addressed Judge Brennan directly. "Your Honor, Bear Thompson has carried Lance Corporal Santos's Bronze Star for 55 years, not as a trophy or decoration, but as a sacred trust. He has never claimed it was awarded to him. He has never used it to gain benefits or recognition. He carries it in memory of a young Marine who died believing in something greater than himself." She gestured toward Martinez. "This prosecutor has turned a sacred act of remembrance into a federal crime. She has publicly humiliated a man who has given more to this country than most of us ever will." William finally spoke, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom with quiet authority. Your Honor, Miss Martinez was doing her job as she understood. She saw an old man with a medal and made assumptions, but Michael Santos died so that people could have the freedom to make mistakes, even about him. The grace in his response, offering understanding instead of demanding retribution, struck everyone present like a physical blow. Judge Brennan realized he was facing a choice that would define the rest of his career, and possibly his life. Judge Brennan set down his gavel with trembling hands, his face showing the full weight of how close he had come to committing an irreversible injustice. Mr. Thompson, Sergeant Thompson, this court owes you a profound apology. He looked at Martinez, whose face had gone completely white as the implications of her prosecution became clear. Miss Martinez, I strongly suggest you dismiss all charges immediately and offer your own apology to this decorated Marine. But General Hayes wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and showed Judge Brennan a photograph, a young Marine in Vietnam-era uniform, barely old enough to shave, holding a rifle and grinning at the camera. This is Lance Corporal Michael Santos, she said, 19 years old, from East Los Angeles. He joined the Marines because he wanted to serve his country and provide for his younger siblings. He never made it to his 20th birthday. She showed another photograph, this one of a much younger William Thompson, lean and hard, standing beside Santos in what appeared to be a forward operating base. Bear Thompson was Santos's team leader. When their patrol was ambushed, Santos voluntarily exposed himself to enemy fire to give civilian refugees time to reach safety. He was hit multiple times but continued fighting until he collapsed. General Hayes's voice grew softer, more personal. As Santos was dying, he told Bear that he was scared his family would never know he had been brave. He pressed his bronze star into Bear's hand and made him promise to carry it home, to remember that he had been a good Marine. William's eyes were distant, lost in memories that clearly still caused him pain. I've carried Michael's medal to every memorial service, every Veterans Day ceremony, every funeral for a fallen Marine, not because I earned it, but because he did, and because someone needs to remember. Martinez finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Mr. Thompson, I'm deeply sorry. I had no idea. You thought you were protecting legitimate veterans, William said with characteristic grace. That's important work. Michael would have understood. Colonel Morrison stepped forward with another document. Your Honor, there's something else the court should know. Bear Thompson has been recommended for the Medal of Honor 3 separate times for his actions in Vietnam. Each time he has refused the recommendation. Judge Brennan looked stunned. Refused the Medal of Honor? Why? William's answer was simple and direct. Because Michael Santos should have gotten home to receive his own medal. If I accept recognition for the same actions that got him killed, it feels like I'm taking something that belonged to him. The courtroom was completely silent, the weight of William's words settling over everyone present like a benediction. General Hayes made one final announcement that would change everything. Your Honor, this incident has highlighted a serious gap in how our legal system interacts with classified veteran records. We will be recommending immediate policy changes to prevent future misunderstanding. 3 weeks later, the changes were already becoming visible throughout the state's legal system. What became known as the Thompson Protocol required all prosecutors to consult with veteran affairs specialists before filing stolen valor charges, ensuring that cases involving classified service records would be properly vetted before reaching court. Martinez had not been fired, but she had been reassigned to a community outreach program focusing on veteran legal services, a role that would teach her more about military service in 6 months than she had learned in her entire legal career. Judge Brennan had issued a formal letter of apology to William and ordered the creation of a specialized veterans court designed to handle cases involving former military personnel with sensitivity and understanding. But perhaps the most significant change was taking place in a small community center in East Los Angeles, where William Thompson was speaking to a group of young people about service, sacrifice, and the importance of remembering those who didn't come home. Michael Santos grew up 3 blocks from here, William told the audience, holding up a photograph of the young Marine. He wasn't perfect. He got in trouble at school, worried his parents, made the same mistakes a lot of teenagers make. But when his country called, he answered. In the front row sat Maria Santos Rodriguez, Michael's younger sister, now a grandmother herself. She had traveled from Los Angeles after seeing the news coverage of the courthouse incident, finally meeting the man who had carried her brother's memory for over 50 years. Miss Thompson kept his promise to my brother, she told the audience through tears. For 55 years he made sure Michael wasn't forgotten. That's what real heroes do. They keep promises even when no one is watching. William had tried to give her the Bronze Star, feeling that it rightfully belonged to Michael's family. But Maria had refused, understanding something that took the rest of the room several minutes to grasp. This medal has been carried by someone who earned the right to carry it, she had said. Michael gave it to you because he trusted you to honor it. I'm not going to take that trust away from either of you. In the back of the room, Jessica Chen was recording everything on her phone, planning to create a documentary about the incident for her law school thesis project. The young woman who had made the crucial phone call was now working to ensure that William's story would reach the widest possible audience. Colonel Morrison and General Hayes were also present, having traveled from Washington specifically to attend this community meeting. They represented a military establishment that was finally beginning to acknowledge the sacrifices made by veterans whose service had been hidden in classified files for decades. Bear Thompson represents thousands of veterans whose stories can't be told, General Hayes said when called upon to speak. They served in places that don't appear on maps, conducting operations that officially never happened. They've carried their secrets and their scars in silence, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that their service mattered. 6 months after the courthouse incident, William Thompson found himself in Washington, standing in the Pentagon beside a display case that had been specially created to honor classified operations veterans. The centerpiece of the display was Lance Corporal Michael Santos's Bronze Star, finally given the recognition it had deserved for over half a century. Below it was a simple plaque that read, "Carried with honor by Sergeant William Bear Thompson, USMC, in memory of Lance Corporal Michael Santos, who gave his life for others in service to his country. This is the first time we've been able to publicly acknowledge many of these operations," General Hayes explained to the small crowd of military officials and family members who had gathered for the dedication ceremony. These Marines served in the shadows, and their stories have remained classified until now. William stood quietly beside Maria Santos Rodriguez, both of them studying the display that finally told Michael's story in an official capacity. After decades of secrecy, the young Marine's sacrifice was being acknowledged by the institution he had died serving. Michael would have been embarrassed by all this attention. Maria said softly, "He was always modest about everything, even his William smiled, remembering the young man who had worried more about his family's financial struggles than his own safety in combat. He was the best of us. He understood what we were fighting for better than any of us." The ceremony concluded with full military honors, something that Michael Santos had never received when he died in a classified operation that couldn't be acknowledged. 55 years late, but finally complete. Martinez was also present, having requested permission to attend as part of her ongoing education about veteran affairs. Her transformation from aggressive prosecutor to veteran advocate had been genuine and complete, driven by the realization of how close she had come to destroying something sacred. "Thompson," she said as the ceremony concluded, "I wanted to thank you again for your grace in how you handled my mistake. You taught me something about justice that they don't teach in law school." William clasped her hand warmly. "You were protecting something important, the honor of military service. Michael would have respected that, even if you got the details wrong." Judge Brennan had also made the trip to Washington, bringing with him the formal documents establishing the state's first specialized veterans court. The program was already being studied by other states as a model for handling legal issues involving former military personnel. "This all started because an old Marine wanted to honor a fallen friend," he told the gathering. "It's become something much larger, a reminder that our legal system must be capable of recognizing forms of honor that don't fit standard categories." As the crowd dispersed, William remained standing before the display case, alone with his memories and his promise finally fulfilled. Michael Santos's story would now be remembered by generations of Marines who would learn about classified operations and the price of service in places where recognition couldn't be given. 1 year later, William Thompson received an unexpected visitor at his modest apartment in San Diego. The young man at his door wore civilian clothes, but his bearing screamed military training, the same alert posture and careful movements that William recognized in all former combat Marines. "Mr. Thompson, my name is David Santos. I'm Michael's great-nephew." David was 22, just a few years older than Michael had been when he died in Vietnam. He had learned about his great-uncle's story through the documentary Jessica Chen had created, which had gone viral and reached millions of viewers worldwide. "I joined the Marines because of what I learned about Uncle Michael," David said as William invited him inside. "I wanted to understand what kind of man he was, what kind of courage he showed." William studied the young man's face, seeing echoes of the teenager who had died in his arms decades earlier. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the same serious eyes, the same determined jawline, the same sense of purpose that had made Michael Santos willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. "He was afraid," William said simply, "scared every day, just like the rest of us. But he did his job anyway, Because it was the right thing to do. That's not special training or superior genetics. That's character. David had brought something with him, a letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, informing William that he had been selected to receive the Medal of Honor for his actions in Vietnam. The recommendation had finally been approved after declassification of operational records had made public recognition possible. "I'm honored," William said, "but I'm not sure I can accept it." David looked confused. "Sir, this is the highest honor our country can bestow. Why wouldn't you accept it?" William walked to a small shelf where he kept his few military mementos, photographs from Vietnam, letters from Marines he had served with, a folded flag from Michael Santos's memorial service that had finally been held in Los Angeles. "Because accepting recognition for myself feels like betraying the promise I made to Michael. His actions that day were just as heroic as mine. The only difference is that he didn't survive to be recognized for them." David was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with wisdom beyond his years. "Mr. Thompson, maybe accepting the medal isn't about you. Maybe it's about representing all the Marines who served in classified operations, all the ones whose stories still can't be told." William looked at the young man so much like his great-uncle, carrying the same sense of duty and honor that had motivated Michael Santos to volunteer for the most dangerous missions. "You sound like him," William said finally. "Michael always understood the bigger picture better than the rest of us." David smiled. "My grandmother, Michael's sister, she told me that before you carry someone's memory you have to understand what they would have wanted. Uncle Michael would have wanted his story to help other veterans, wouldn't he?" For the first time in over 50 years, William Thompson began to consider the possibility that accepting recognition might be another way of keeping his promise. 6 months later, William Thompson stood in the East Room of the White House, surrounded by Marines from every era of Corps history. The ceremony had drawn veterans from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts that still couldn't be named in public record. President Johnson placed the Medal of Honor around William's neck, but the real moment of recognition came when the Marine Honor Guard presented arms in perfect unison, a tribute not just to William, but to every Marine who had served in operations that required official silence. "This medal represents more than individual courage," the President said in his remarks. "It represents the sacred trust between those who serve and those who remember their service." Sergeant Thompson has carried that trust for 55 years, ensuring that Lance Corporal Santos's sacrifice would never be forgotten. In the front row, Maria Santos Rodriguez sat beside her grandson David, both of them finally witnessing the official recognition that Michael Santos had earned but never received. The ceremony was being broadcast live, ensuring that Michael's story would reach every corner of the nation. "I accept this honor," William said when called upon to speak, "not for myself, but for every Marine who served in classified operations. Every soldier whose sacrifice couldn't be acknowledged, every family that grieved in silence because their loved one's mission was too sensitive to discuss." He looked directly at the television cameras, knowing that thousands of veterans were watching. Michael Santos died believing in something greater than himself. He believed that some things are worth fighting for, even if you never get credit for the fight. That belief is what makes heroes, not the medals or the recognition, but the willingness to serve regardless of whether anyone will ever know. After the ceremony, William found himself in the White House garden with David Santos, both men contemplating the weight of promises kept and legacies honored. "Uncle Michael's story is part of official history now," David said. "Kids will learn about him in school, Marines will hear about him in training. He's not forgotten anymore." William nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for so long he had forgotten its presence. He never wanted to be forgotten. None of them did. They just wanted to matter. As they walked through the garden, William's thoughts turned to all the other classified veterans whose stories still couldn't be told, whose families still didn't know the full truth of their service and sacrifice. The Medal of Honor ceremony had been just the beginning of a larger recognition that was still unfolding. "You know what Michael would say if he could see all this?" William asked David. "What's that, sir?" William smiled, remembering the young Marine's voice across the decade. "He'd say it's about time somebody else got to carry the load for a while." The promise had been kept, the trust had been honored, and the memory would endure long after both of them were gone. Sometimes that's all a Marine can ask for.